Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The alarm went off at 2:47 a.m. last Tuesday, and I know for a fact I never set it. Not for that time, not for any time that night. My phone was on silent mode, charging across the room, and yet that familiar iPhone marimba tone pierced through my bedroom like a knife through butter. If you're listening to this right now, check your alarm history. I bet you'll find times you don't remember setting too. But here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. Mine started playing messages. Messages from someone who's been dead for 3 years. Before you click away thinking this is just another creepypasta, wait, because what I'm about to tell you is happening right now, tonight, while you're listening to this. And once you know what to look for, you'll realize it's been happening to you too. Our story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. 3rd floor of a converted Victorian on Hawthorne Boulevard. The kind of place where the hardwood floors creak at night and the radiator pipes knock like someone's trapped inside them. I moved here after college, got a job at a tech startup downtown, and settled into that comfortable routine of work, Netflix, sleep, repeat. I'm telling you these details because they matter. Because normal people, living normal lives, that's who this happens to. Not ghost hunters, not paranormal investigators. Just people like you and me who set their alarms for 6:30 a.m. and expect them to go off at, 6:30 a.m. The first time it happened, I blamed it on a software glitch. You know how it is with iPhones after an update. Things get weird. The alarm went off at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. I fumbled for my phone in the dark, squinting at the screen through sleep-crusty eyes. The alarm label read, "Wake up." My usual morning alarm, but the time was all wrong. I turned it off, checked my alarm settings. Everything looked normal. 6:30 a.m. for weekdays, 8 o'clock a.m. for weekends. No 2:47 a.m. anywhere. I figured I must have accidentally set it while scrolling through my phone before bed. We've all done that, right? Pocket-dialed someone. Accidentally liked an ex's photo from 3 years ago while stalking their Instagram. Technology makes fools of us all. But then it happened again the next Tuesday. Same time. 2:47 a.m. exactly. This time, I was ready. Sort of. I'd deleted all my alarms and recreated them fresh. Even showed my coworker Mike my phone that afternoon. "Look, see? No weird middle-of-the-night alarms." He laughed. Said I probably had carbon monoxide poisoning and was setting them myself without remembering. Very funny, Mike. When it went off that second Tuesday, I didn't just turn it off. I lay there listening. Because here's the thing about that iPhone marimba tone. It's designed to be pleasant but insistent. Cheerful but demanding. But this time it sounded different. Slower. Like it was playing underwater, and underneath it, barely audible, was something else. Static, white noise, like an untuned radio station. I grabbed my phone, and the screen showed something impossible. The alarm notification said 2:47 a.m., check your voicemail. I don't know about you, but I haven't checked voicemail in years. Who leaves voicemails anymore? But my hands were already moving. Muscle memory from a time before texting ruled our lives. I pressed the phone icon. There it was, one new voicemail, received at 2:47 a.m. The timestamp made my stomach drop. It was 2:47 a.m. right now. How could I have a voicemail from now? I pressed play. Static filled my ear. Then, a voice. Distorted, stretched, like someone talking through a fan. "Sarah, it's me. I know you're listening. Tuesday, always Tuesday, 2:47. Remember the lake house? the message ended. Duration, 13 seconds. From unknown number. But I recognized the voice, even through the distortion. I knew who it was. My college roommate, Jenna, who drowned at her family's lake house in Michigan 3 years ago. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. How could I? I sat at my kitchen table with every light in the apartment on, replaying that voicemail over and over. Each time I listened, I heard something new, a sound in the background. Water. Lapping water. Like waves against a dock. When the sun finally came up, I called in sick to work. Spent the entire day researching. Ghost stories. Electronic voice phenomena. Grief hallucinations. Anything that could explain what was happening. But nothing quite fit. This wasn't some vague paranormal experience. This was specific, targeted, personal. Jenna and I had been close in college. University of Washington. Both computer science majors. Both night owls who'd stay up until 3 a.m. debugging code and eating microwave popcorn. She was from Michigan originally. Had this beautiful family lake house in Traverse City where we spent a week one summer between junior and senior year. That week at the lake house, it was perfect. We paddleboarded during the day, built bonfires at night, talked about our plans after graduation. She was going to work for Microsoft. I was going to join a startup. We'd get apartments in the same building in Capitol Hill. We had it all figured out. But life doesn't care about your plans. She took a job in Seattle like we'd discussed. I ended up in Portland. My startup opportunity too good to pass up. We texted constantly at first, FaceTimed every Sunday, but you know how it goes. The texts get shorter, the calls less frequent. We kept saying we'd visit each other, but never did. Then, the accident. She'd gone back to the lake house for a family reunion. Went swimming alone at night, something she'd done 100 times before. They found her the next morning. I went to the funeral, cried until I couldn't breathe. Promised myself I'd honor her memory by living fully, whatever that meant. And for 3 years, I thought I had, until the alarm started. That Thursday, I did something crazy. I bought a digital recorder. One of those paranormal investigation tools you see on ghost hunting shows. If something was trying to communicate with me, I wanted proof. Real proof. Not just my word against a mysteriously appearing voicemail. I also did something else. I called Jenna's mom. "Mrs. Patterson, it's Sarah, Jenna's friend from college?" Her voice brightened immediately. "Sarah, oh honey, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you?" We made small talk for a few minutes, but I had to ask. "Mrs. Patterson, this might sound strange, but was there anything special about 2:47 a.m. to Jenna?" Silence, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Why do you ask?" Her voice was different now, careful. I've been having these dreams about her, always at the same time." 2:47 a.m. Another pause, then, "That was the time on the clock when we found her. 2:47 a.m., the dock clock, it had stopped. Water damage, the police said, but it stopped at the exact time she didn't finish, didn't need to. We talked a little more, but my mind was spinning. The clock stopped at 2:47, the exact time my alarm kept going off, every Tuesday. But why Tuesday? Then it hit me. Jenna died on a Tuesday. The next Tuesday, I was ready. Digital recorder on my nightstand. Phone fully charged. Every app closed except for the voice recorder and camera. If something supernatural was happening, I was going to document it. 2:46 a.m. I sat up in bed, watching my phone, waiting. 2:47 a.m. The alarm didn't go off. Instead, my phone started typing, by itself. The Notes app opened, and words appeared on the screen. letter by letter, like someone was typing them from the other side. "Sarah, you're listening. Good. The alarm was just to get your attention. This is easier." My hands shook as I screenshotted. Evidence. I needed evidence. More words appeared. The lake house. Something's wrong. Someone's there who shouldn't be. I typed back, feeling insane but doing it anyway. "Jenna, is this really you? Who else knows about the purple kayak?" My breath caught. The purple kayak. Jenna's dad had painted an old kayak purple as a joke. Said it was the portal to adventure. We'd laughed about it all week, took ridiculous photos with it, named it Barney after the dinosaur. Nobody else would know about that. Nobody. What do you mean someone's there who shouldn't be? Tuesday. Every Tuesday. He goes back. 2:47 a.m. The same time. Looking for something. Who? Who goes back? The typing stopped, then started again. Faster. Urgent. Check the news. Traverse City. Missing women. All swimmers. All at night. All found at 2:47 a.m. Then my phone died. Not powered down. Dead. Like the battery had been completely drained in an instant. The digital recorder, still running, had captured everything. The soft tap-tap-tap of invisible fingers on my phone screen. I plugged in my phone with shaking hands, waited for it to power back on. When it did, the Notes app was empty. No evidence of our conversation. But the screenshots were still in my photos. I didn't wait until morning. I opened my laptop and searched Traverse City missing swimmers. The results made my blood run cold. 4 women in the past 3 years, all experienced swimmers. All disappeared from various lakes around Traverse City, all found drowned and buried in the articles, a detail that made me want to throw up. All were found by the same person, a local man named Daniel Morrison who worked for the marina. He'd found them during his early morning walks. The articles praised him as a hero, always in the right place at the right time, always there to comfort the families. I knew that name, Daniel Morrison. He was the maintenance worker at Jenna's family lake house. He'd been there the night she died. I should have called the police. Should have reported my suspicions. But what would I say? A ghost is texting me about a serial killer? They'd think I was having a mental breakdown. Maybe I was. But I had to know. Had to be sure. That Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through old photos, college photos, Jenna and me at the lake house. And there, in the background of a sunset selfie, was Daniel Morrison, working on the dock. We'd barely noticed him then, the invisible help, the background character in our perfect summer story. I zoomed in on his face. He was watching us, not working, watching. And his expression, God, his expression was so patient, like a spider waiting in its web. I found more photos. He was in at least 7 of them, always in the background, always watching. How had we not noticed? How had we been so blind? But then again, that's how predators work, isn't it? They become part of the scenery, helpful, harmless. The nice guy who's always around to lend a hand. I couldn't stop thinking about the other women, the ones he'd found. Were there photos of them too? Social media posts with him lurking in the background? Digital breadcrumbs leading to their deaths? I spent the entire weekend researching, creating timelines, mapping locations. The patterns were there if you looked for them. All the drownings happened during family gatherings, reunions, celebrations, times when people let their guard down, times when one person going for a late-night swim wouldn't seem unusual. And Daniel Morrison. He worked at 3 of the 4 locations where women had drowned. The 4th? His cousin owned the property. He would have had access. By Monday morning, I'd built a case. Not legally admissible, but compelling. enough to make someone look closer. But who would believe me? Who would take my dead friend is texting me about a serial killer seriously? That's when I remembered Dr. Patricia Vance. Dr. Vance taught criminal psychology at UW when Jenna and I were students. She'd also consulted with the FBI on serial killer cases. If anyone would listen without immediately calling for a psychiatric hold, it would be her. I found her email on the university website. Spent 3 hours crafting a message that sounded sane, professional, logical. I included my research, the patterns, the connections, everything except the supernatural elements. She responded within an hour. "Sarah, this is very interesting. Can we speak by phone? Patricia." The call lasted 2 hours. Dr. Vance listened, asked pointed questions, never once suggested I was crazy. At the end, she said something that chilled me to the bone. "Sarah, I've been tracking similar patterns in 5 other states, different names, same methodology, bodies of water, young women, always found by the same helpful local. You may have found another one." "Another one? Not the only one. Another one. What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. But Sarah, be careful. If your research is correct, this person has been operating for years without suspicion. They're intelligent, careful, and if they know you're on to them." She didn't need to finish. I took time off work, told Mike I had a family emergency. Then I drove to Michigan. 13 hours straight, stopping only for gas and coffee. The whole drive. I kept thinking about Jenna, about the lake house, about Daniel Morrison. I arrived in Traverse City at sunset on Monday, checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. The Lakeside Inn, a rundown place that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. The kind of place where nobody asks questions and the clerk barely looks up from his phone when you check in. Room 247. I wish I was making that up. The universe has a sick sense of humor sometimes. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Stained carpet, creaky bed, a TV from the 90s that only got 3 channels. But it had something I needed, a view of the road leading to the lake house. I set up my laptop, my digital recorder, my phone on a tripod. If something was going to happen, I was going to document every second of it. That first night, Monday night, nothing happened. I sat by the window watching the road, drinking gas station coffee, fighting to stay awake. Every car that passed made my heart race, but none of them were his truck. At 2:47 a.m., my phone did something new. It opened Google Maps by itself and marked a location, not the Patterson Lake House, somewhere else. Another lake, Cedar Lake, about 15 miles away. A text appeared in my notes app. "He's hunting." I wanted to go, wanted to stop whatever was happening, but I was one person, alone, with no real evidence. What was I going to do? So I did the only thing I could. I called 911 from a burner phone I'd bought at Walmart. "There's someone suspicious at Cedar Lake boat launch. I saw them dragging something to the water." They said they'd send a car to check it out. I don't know if they did. I don't know if it mattered. But the next morning, the local news reported that a young woman named Rebecca Martinez had gone missing from a campground at Cedar Lake. Last seen around 11 p.m., going for a night swim. They found her body at dawn. The reporter mentioned that a local maintenance worker, Daniel Morrison, had discovered her during his morning rounds. He'd moved his hunting ground because he knew someone was watching the lake house. Because he knew I was watching. Tuesday, 2 a.m. I drove to the lake house. Jenna's family had sold it a year after her death. Too many memories. It sat empty now, a for sale sign crooked in the overgrown yard. The purple kayak was still there, faded and cracked, leaning against the shed. But something was different. Fresh tire tracks in the mud. Recent. Someone had been here. I parked down the road, walked along the tree line. Every step felt like walking into a trap. The woods were too quiet. No insects, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant lapping of water against the shore. The dock stretched into the darkness like a finger pointing at nothing. And there, at the end, a figure. Not Daniel Morrison, a woman, young, maybe 25, standing perfectly still, staring at the water. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but it was dead, completely drained. The digital recorder in my pocket, also dead. Everything electronic I'd brought, dead. The woman turned around. It was Rebecca Martinez, the girl from the news, the one who drowned last night at Cedar Lake. Her skin was pale blue in the moonlight. Water dripped from her hair in a steady rhythm. Her eyes, God, her eyes were like looking into deep water. Dark, empty, bottomless. "You're Sarah," she said. Her voice was wrong, layered, like multiple people speaking at once. "Jenna told us you'd come." "Us?" And then I saw them, rising from the water. 4 more women, all in different stages of decay, all walking toward the dock, toward me. "He keeps us here," Rebecca said, "tied to the water, to the places we died. But Tuesday nights we can walk. We can warn. We can try." One of the women, older than the others, stepped forward. I was first, Melissa Harper, 2018. He held me under until I stopped fighting, made it look like an accident, just like all the others. Another spoke, Asian features, younger. Katie Zhao, 2019. He drugged my drink at the campground bar. I went for a swim to clear my head. Never made it back. They all had stories. All had been murdered. All had been found by Daniel Morrison, the helpful local hero. "Where is he?" I asked. "Coming," they said in unison. "He always comes, 2:47 every Tuesday, to visit us, to gloat, to relive it." I checked my watch. 2:35 a.m. Old-fashioned analog, still working. "You need to leave." Jenna's voice came from behind me. I spun around. There she was. My friend, looking exactly as she had in college, except for the water. Always the water. Dripping. Pooling. Never stopping. "Jenna," I started to cry. "No time, Sarah. He knows you're here. He's not coming alone tonight." "What do you mean?" "He has others. A network. They share techniques, videos, trophies. You've stumbled into something bigger than one man." Headlights appeared on the road. Not one vehicle. 3. "Run!" Jenna said. "Run!" But I couldn't move. Frozen. Watching as the trucks pulled up. 4 men got out. Daniel Morrison and 3 others, all carrying something. Ropes, weights, black plastic bags. They weren't here to gloat, they were here to clean up loose ends. Me. 2:47 a.m. My phone exploded with alarms. Not just one, dozens, all labeled with names. Jennifer, Megan, Ashley, Claire, Rebecca, and Jenna. But it wasn't just my phone. The men's phones were going off too. All of them. The same alarms, the same time, the same names. They stopped walking. Looked at each other, confused, scared. "What did you do?" Morrison shouted at me. But I hadn't done anything. This was them, the victims, all of them, using the only weapon they had left. Our connection to our devices. Our need to check every notification. Our inability to ignore an alarm. The alarms got louder, impossibly loud. The phones started heating up in their pockets. One man threw his phone on the ground. It kept ringing, getting louder. Then the voices started, coming from the phones, from the lake, from everywhere. "Murderer. We remember. We know what you did. Everyone will know." The men were panicking now. Morrison tried to run back to his truck, but it wouldn't start. None of the vehicles would start. The women in the water had moved closer. You could see them now. Even the men could see them. Pale figures standing waist-deep in the lake, waiting. "This isn't possible," one of the men kept saying. "This isn't possible." Morrison turned to me. "You brought them here. You woke them up." "No," I said, finding my voice. "You did. Every Tuesday at 2:47, you've been coming here, throwing trophies in the water, reliving your crimes. You've been feeding them, making them stronger." The truth was, I didn't know if that was true, but it sounded right, felt right. One of the younger men, maybe 30, broke, started running toward the road. He made it about 50 feet before he stopped, turned around, started walking toward the water. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette. "No," he kept saying. "No, no, no." But his legs kept moving toward the lake, toward the waiting women. He walked into the water, deeper, deeper, until he disappeared under the surface. He didn't come back up. The remaining men huddled together. Morrison pulled out a gun, pointed it at me. "Make it stop," he demanded. "I can't." "Make it stop!" The gun was shaking in his hand, but before he could pull the trigger, his phone rang. Not an alarm this time, an actual call. He looked at the screen. His face went white. It's my mother, but she's been dead for 5 years." He answered it, had to. We always answer when our dead mothers call. I couldn't hear what was said, but I watched his face crumble. The gun fell from his hand. He dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Then he stood up, walked to the water, and kept walking until the lake swallowed him whole. 2 men left. They tried to run, made it to the tree line before the alarms started again. But this time, it wasn't just phones, car alarms. Every vehicle for miles, all going off at once, all playing the same rhythm. Morse code. I recognized it from a coding class where we'd learned about early computer languages. It spelled out MURDERERS. The men stumbled through the woods. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush. Screaming, crying, but they were going in circles, always ending up back at the lake. By 3:15 a.m., they were both gone. Walked into the water just like the others, compelled by something beyond fear, beyond reason, and then silence. The women in the lake were gone. The water was still. My phone powered back on, showing dozens of missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I sat on the dock until sunrise, shaking, trying to process what I'd witnessed. 4 men dead. But how many women had they killed? How many families destroyed? Was this justice, or just more tragedy? When the sun was fully up, I called 911. "There are abandoned vehicles at the old Patterson Lake House. You should send someone." I didn't wait for the police. I got in my car and drove. 13 hours back to Portland. Straight through. No stops. When I got back to Portland, there was a voicemail waiting from an unknown number. Timestamp 2:47 a.m. "Sarah, it's me. Thank you. We're free now. The water doesn't hold us anymore. The network is broken. At least this part of it. But Sarah, there are others, other lakes, other killers, other victims trying to warn the living. The alarms won't stop. Not for you. Not anymore. You're a conduit now, a bridge. The dead will find you when they need someone to listen. When they need justice. I'm sorry, but this is your purpose now. What you were meant to do. Check your phone." The message ended. When I tried to play it again, it was gone, deleted, like it never existed. I checked my phone. In my contacts, Hundreds of new numbers had appeared, all labeled with just first names and dates. Amanda, 2019. Jessica, 20. Michelle, 2021. Going back years, decades even. Dorothy, 1987. Margaret, 1973. All drowning victims, all with unresolved cases. That was 3 weeks ago. The alarms have changed now. Different times, different days. Each one corresponds to a different victim, a different case, a different killer who was never caught. I've started a blog, anonymous, documenting everything. Others have found it. People like me who've been chosen as conduits. We call ourselves the 247 Club. We share information, track patterns, try to prevent the next death. But it's getting harder. The killers are adapting. They know we're watching. They're more careful, more clever. And there are so many of them. Dr. Vance helps when she can. She believes me now, especially after the bodies were pulled from Lake Michigan. 4 men, all with water in their lungs, all with no explanation for why they walked into the lake on a Tuesday night. The police called it a suicide pact, but she knows better. Mike from work thinks I'm having a breakdown. Maybe I am. I barely sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see water, feel it filling my lungs, hear the voices of the drowned. But I can't stop, because the alarms keep coming, and each one is a cry for help. A victim trying to save the next girl, the next swimmer, the next person who thinks a midnight dip in the lake sounds refreshing. Last week, something new happened. I got a text from a number not in my contact list. It just said, "We know what you did at the lake house." Then another, "You killed 4 men," and another, "The network remembers." They're coming for me. The ones who survived, the ones who operate in shadows, who share their sick hobby through encrypted channels and dark web forums. I've become a target, but here's the thing. I'm not afraid anymore, because I'm not alone. The dead are with me, protecting me, warning me. My apartment is full of alarms now. Old clock radios I've bought from thrift stores, digital watches, anything that can be programmed to go off at specific times. Each one is set to a different victim's time of death. It's like living inside a memorial, a constant reminder of lives cut short. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy, if all of this is just elaborate grief-induced psychosis. But then I get messages from other members of the 247 Club. Photos of killers they've identified, news articles about bodies found, prevented drownings because someone got a warning alarm and decided not to go swimming that night. Because here's the thing I've learned. The thing that keeps me up at night even without the alarms. These killers aren't just random psychopaths. They're organized, connected. They have forums, annual gatherings disguised as fishing trips or marina worker conventions. They share techniques, trade locations, cover for each other. Daniel Morrison wasn't unique. There are hundreds like him, maybe thousands, all over the country, maybe all over the world. People who lurk near water, who wait for swimmers, who know exactly when and where to be. They call themselves fishermen. The women are their catch. The lakes are their hunting grounds. And for decades, centuries maybe, they've operated without consequence. Because who questions a drowning? Who suspects murder when there's no sign of struggle? Water washes away evidence, makes everything look like an accident. But the dead remember. And now they have a voice, through our phones, through our technology, through the very devices we can't live without. And somehow, the dead are trying to warn us, through our phones, through our alarms, through the very technology we depend on every day. The network, the killers, they're trying to adapt. They're leaving their phones at home, avoiding electronics, going analog. But it's too late. The dead have evolved. They don't need the killers to carry phones anymore. They can reach anyone who's willing to listen. 3 days ago, I got a new kind of message. Not an alarm, not a voicemail. My laptop camera turned on by itself, and in the reflection on my screen, I saw her, Jenna, standing behind me. But when I turned around, nothing. She was in the screen, trapped in the digital reflection. Her lips were moving, forming words. They're coming. That night, someone tried to break into my apartment. The door handle jiggled at exactly 2:47 a.m., but every electronic device I owned went haywire. Alarms shrieking, lights flashing. The neighbors called the cops. Whoever it was fled. The police found footprints, wet footprints, leading from my door to the stairwell, but it hadn't rained in days. I'm leaving Portland tomorrow, not running, hunting. Dr. Vance has given me a list. Locations where drowning deaths have spiked in the last 5 years. Lakes, rivers, coastal towns, places where the pattern is emerging. I'm going to find them, the fishermen, document them, expose them. And maybe, just maybe, give the dead their justice. But first, I need to tell you something important. So I'll ask you again. Check your alarm history. Look for times you didn't set, especially 2:47 a.m., especially on Tuesdays, but also check for other patterns. 3:33 a.m., 4:15 a.m., 1:26 a.m., every victim has their own time, their own moment when they try to break through. And if you find them, if you've been getting calls from unknown numbers, messages that disappear, alarms that shouldn't exist, don't ignore them. Someone's trying to tell you something, someone who can't speak any other way. And if you're listening to this near water, any water, and you get a sudden urge to go for a night swim, just don't. That urge might not be yours. The fishermen have ways of calling their catch. Subliminal messages in local radio stations. Chemicals in the water that trigger specific behaviors. They've been perfecting their methods for generations. But we're fighting back now, the living and the dead, together. Last night, my alarm went off again. 2:47 a.m. But this time, it wasn't Jenna's voice in the voicemail. It was my own. From 3 days in the future. And all it said was, don't go near the water. They know who you are now. They all know. The network has marked you. Portland isn't safe. Nowhere near water is safe. But you can't run from water. It's everywhere. In the rain, in the pipes, in bottles, in the very air we breathe. They're going to use it against you. Friday. They're coming Friday. Be ready. I live in Portland. It rains here every day. Water is everywhere. Puddles, rivers, the ocean an hour away. How do you avoid water when it's everywhere? How do you run from something that covers 70% of the earth? You don't. You just wait. And listen for the alarm. The alarm that goes off at times you didn't set. But here's what the voicemail didn't tell me. What I figured out on my own. If I'm getting messages from myself 3 days in the future, it means I survive whatever happens on Friday. It means I make it through. Or maybe it just means time doesn't work the way we think it does when you're dead. Maybe the future versions of us are already gone, already trying to warn our past selves, already caught in an endless loop of warnings that come too late. I guess I'll find out on Friday. If you don't hear from me after that, if this story suddenly disappears, if my social media goes dark, you'll know what happened, and maybe you'll get an alarm. 2:47 a.m. with my name on it. Sarah, just Sarah. Another girl who went swimming and never came back. If this happened to you, if you've experienced anything similar, leave a comment below. We need to know how widespread this is. How many of us are receiving these warnings? How many Daniel Morrisons are out there? How many fishermen are watching, waiting, hunting? And please, share this story. Someone you know might be getting these alarms too. They might think they're going crazy. They need to know they're not alone. Check your swimming photos from last summer. Look in the background. Is there someone there who shouldn't be? Someone watching? Someone who's always at the lake but never in the water? We're building a database, documenting every suspicious drowning, every helpful local who's always finding bodies, every lake with too many accidents. The dead are counting on us. The future victims need us to act now. And remember, when your phone does something impossible, when technology acts in ways it shouldn't, it might not be a glitch. It might be someone trying desperately to save your life. We're never alone. Not anymore. Not since the alarms started. Not since the dead learned to text. Story number 2. The hike up the trail was eerily quiet. No animals, no insects. Even the wind had died. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. My flashlight beam seemed weak against the darkness, swallowed up by the trees after just a few feet. The trail was well maintained for the first mile. Gravel path, occasional benches, signs marking different tree species. But after that, it deteriorated, became a deer path, then barely a suggestion of a trail. By the time I reached the 2-mile marker, a wooden post so weathered the 2 was barely visible. I was pushing through undergrowth, branches catching at my clothes. I turned east, following the sound of running water. The creek was narrow but fast-moving, ice-cold when I accidentally stepped in it. I followed it upstream, climbing over fallen logs, pushing through. I'm the only one who remembers the missing students. The yearbook from 2019 sits open on my kitchen table, and I'm staring at faces that supposedly never existed. Madison Chen, Trevor Williams, Sophie Martinez. I trace my finger across their senior photos, remembering Madison's laugh during chemistry lab, Trevor's terrible jokes in English class, Sophie's obsession with true crime podcasts. But according to everyone else in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, these people were never here. If you're listening to this late at night, maybe check your old yearbooks. See if you notice anyone missing. Because what happened in my town might be happening in yours too. And you might be the only one who remembers. Let me ask you something, and really think about this. Do you remember every single person from your graduating class? Every face? Every name? What if I told you that some of them aren't supposed to be remembered at all? And now, the story begins. 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning out my apartment in Denver when I found it. My high school yearbook from Cedar Ridge High, class of 2019. I hadn't looked at it in 5 years, not since graduation. I was about to toss it in the donation pile when something made me stop, just flip through it one more time. The weight of it felt wrong somehow, too light, like pages were missing. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by boxes and old memories, and opened it to the senior portraits section. The afternoon sun slanted through my window, casting long shadows across the glossy pages. That's when my blood went cold. The pages jumped from Bradley Chambers to Daniel Chen. No Madison Chen between them. Madison, who'd been my lab partner for 2 years. Madison, who'd gotten into MIT and cried happy tears in the hallway. Madison, who used to bring extra sandwiches because she knew I always forgot lunch on Tuesdays. Her page was just gone, not torn out. The page numbers were sequential, 46 to 47, no gap. It was like she'd been edited out of existence. I remember specifically the day yearbook photos were taken. Madison had worn her NASA hoodie initially, and Mrs. Coleman made her change into something more formal. She'd borrowed a cardigan from Sophie Martinez, and complained about it the entire day. The memory was so vivid I could still hear her voice. I look like I'm attending a PTA meeting, not applying to MIT. But according to this yearbook, that day never happened. That person never existed. My hands started shaking as I flipped faster through the pages. Anthony Williams to Rebecca Wilson. No, Trevor Williams. Emily Martinez to Robert Mason. No, Sophie Martinez. 3 people I knew. 3 people I remembered clearly, completely absent from the yearbook. But it wasn't just their portraits missing. I flipped to the activities section. The Science Olympiad team photo. Madison should have been front row center as team captain. The space where she should have stood was filled by Jennifer Park, who I distinctly remembered being the alternate. The basketball team pages. Trevor's number 23 jersey was now worn by Marcus Webb, who'd actually been number 15. The drama club's production of Our Town. Sophie's name wasn't in the cast list, though I could still quote her opening monologue word for word. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and pulled up Facebook. Searched for Madison Chen from Cedar Ridge High. Nothing. Not even in the People You May Know suggestions, where Facebook's algorithm usually dredges up everyone who ever breathed the same air as you. Trevor Williams, nothing. Sophie Martinez, nothing. Not just inactive profiles. They didn't exist. No tagged photos, no mentions, no digital footprint whatsoever. Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, even MySpace archives. I searched everywhere. It was as if 3 people had been surgically removed from the digital world, but that was impossible. Wasn't it? Everyone leaves traces, digital breadcrumbs. Even if you delete your accounts, cached pages exist. Tagged group photos remain. Other people's memories preserve you online. Unless everyone else forgot to. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I called my best friend from high school, Jake Morrison. He still lived in Cedar Ridge, worked at his dad's hardware store on Main Street. Jake, weird question, but do you remember Madison Chen from our class? There was a pause. Not the pause of someone trying to remember, but the pause of someone suddenly confused. Like when you walk into a room and forget why you came. Madison who? Chen. Madison Chen. She was in our AP chemistry class. Asian girl, really smart. Always wore that NASA hoodie. Dude, I think you're mixing up people from college or something. We didn't have anyone named Madison in our class. What about Trevor Williams? Tall guy, played basketball. He dated your cousin Rachel for like 3 months junior year. Another weird pause. Rachel never dated anyone named Trevor. She was with Marcus Webb junior year, and we had a Derek Williams on the team, no Trevor though. Sophie Martinez? She was in drama with your sister. Who? The confusion in his voice was genuine. But there was something else too. A slight tremor, like part of his brain was fighting against itself. Jake, this is important. Really think. Sophie Martinez, brown hair, always carried a red backpack covered in button pins. She played Emily in Our Town. Your sister played Mrs. Webb. They practiced lines together at your house. Alex, man, are you okay? You're kind of freaking me out. Jennifer Park played Emily. I remember because my sister was pissed she didn't get the lead. But that was wrong. Jennifer had been the stage manager. I remembered opening night clearly because Jennifer had forgotten her lines, and Sophie had to improvise for nearly a full minute to cover for her. I hung up, my hands trembling. Either I was losing my mind, or something was very, very wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing their faces. Madison's smile when she finally understood orbital hybridization after I'd explained it 4 different ways. Trevor's concentration during free throws, that little ritual where he'd bounce the ball exactly 3 times. Sophie's excitement when she talked about the latest episode of her favorite podcast, gesticulating wildly with her hands, nearly knocking over her lunch tray every single time. These weren't vague memories, they were specific, detailed, real. I remembered the scar on Madison's left hand from a chemistry accident sophomore year. I remembered Trevor's laugh, loud and honking, embarrassing in movie theaters. I remembered Sophie's obsession with collecting vintage typewriters, how she'd dragged us all to an estate sale in Boulder, where she'd bought a 1962 Olivetti for $40 and acted like she'd won the lottery. You don't imagine details like that. You don't create entire people out of nothing, complete with quirks and flaws and thousands of tiny moments. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop, started searching for any evidence they'd existed. School records were behind passwords I didn't have, but I found the archived Cedar Ridge High School online newspaper. Spent hours going through every issue from 2015 to 2019. There it was, an article about the Science Olympiad team winning regionals. The article mentioned Jennifer Park as team captain. But I'd written that article. I was on the newspaper staff, and I knew I'd written Madison's name. I'd even included a quote from her about dedicating the win to her grandmother who'd just passed away. The quote was still there, word for word what Madison had said, but now attributed to Jennifer Park. My skin crawled. This wasn't just missing people. This was rewritten history. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove the 3 hours back to Cedar Ridge. I had to know. Cedar Ridge hadn't changed much. Same main street with the same old shops, same mountains looming in the distance, same smell of pine and small-town quietness. But something felt off, like looking at a familiar painting and realizing someone had changed tiny details. I went straight to the high school. It was Saturday, but I knew Mr. Peterson, the janitor, would be there. He'd been there since the 70s. If anyone would remember, it would be him. I found him waxing the floors in the main hallway, same as always. Mr. Peterson, hey, it's me, Alex Thompson, class of 2019. His face lit up with recognition. Alex, good to see you. What brings you back? This is going to sound crazy, but do you remember a student named Madison Chen? Would have graduated with me? His expression shifted, just for a second. A flicker of something. Fear? Recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by confusion. Can't say I do, and I remember most kids who come through here. What about Trevor Williams? Sophie Martinez? He stopped mopping, looked at me directly. Alex, you feeling all right? Maybe you should head home, get some rest. There was something in his eyes, a warning. I left the school and drove to the library. The Cedar Ridge Public Library kept copies of all the local newspapers. If these three had existed, there'd be evidence. Honor roll lists, sports coverage, something. I spent hours going through microfilm from 2015 to 2019. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop. Found plenty of articles about our class, our basketball team's run to state semifinals, but no mention of Trevor, even though I distinctly remembered him scoring the winning shot against Riverside. 23 seconds left on the clock. Score tied 68-68. Trevor had stolen the ball, driven down court, and sank a three-pointer just as the buzzer sounded. The crowd had gone insane. I'd rushed the court with everyone else, had helped carry him on our shoulders. But according to the newspaper, Marcus Webb had made that shot, the National Honor Society induction ceremony. Madison's name wasn't on the list even though she'd been our salutatorian. She'd given a speech about how failure was just another form of data collection. Everyone had laughed when she'd said, my GPA is 4.2, but my failures are countless, and I've learned more from them than any A+ ever taught me. That exact quote was in the newspaper, but attributed to Daniel Chen, who I remembered as being ranked 5th in our class, not 2nd. The school play, where Sophie had starred as Emily in Our Town, the article listed Jennifer Park in the role, but I could still hear Sophie's voice breaking during Emily's goodbye to the world speech. She'd actually cried on stage, real tears, and the entire auditorium had been silent, mesmerized. But then I found something. A photo from a school assembly in 2018. There, in the third row, I could see them. All three of them. Madison in her NASA hoodie. Trevor in his Letterman jacket. Sophie with her signature red backpack covered in those button pins. I could even make out the "Nevertheless, She Persisted" pin she'd worn every day after the 2017 Women's March. They were there. But in the caption listing students, their names were missing. Like someone had edited the text but forgot about the photo. Or couldn't edit it. As if the photo itself resisted the erasure. I took a picture with my phone, my hands shaking. The librarian, Mrs. Hendricks, appeared beside me. She'd been the librarian when I was in school, too. "Finding everything you need, Alex?" "Mrs. Hendricks, look at this photo. Do you recognize these three students?" I pointed to Madison, Trevor, and Sophie. She leaned in close, stared for a long moment. Her fingers traced over their faces and I saw her pupils dilate. Her breathing quickened. I don't... She pressed her fingers to her temples, wincing as if in pain. "That's strange. I feel like I should... But there's something. Why can't I..." Her nose began to bleed. Just a single drop at first, then a steady trickle. She didn't seem to notice. "You remember them, don't you? Some part of you remembers." She backed away from me, fear flickering across her face. The blood from her nose had reached her lip now. I have to go check on something." She practically ran back to her desk, grabbing a tissue as she went. I watched her make a phone call, her voice urgent but too quiet to hear. She kept glancing back at me, fear growing in her eyes. I left the library with more questions than answers. But I had proof now. They had existed. The photo proved it. That evening, I checked into the Cedar Ridge Motel, the only place to stay in town besides the expensive ski lodge. The place hadn't been updated since the 80s. Wood paneling, orange shag carpet, the persistent smell of old cigarette smoke despite the no smoking signs. I needed more time to investigate. The desk clerk, a young woman I didn't recognize, handed me the key to room 237. "Staying long?" she asked. Her name tag read Brittany. "Few days, maybe." "Hey, weird question. Did you go to Cedar Ridge High?" "Class of 2021, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Did you know any upperclassmen? Like a Madison Chen, Trevor Williams, or Sophie Martinez?" Her smile faltered. Her hand went to her throat, fingers finding a necklace I hadn't noticed before. A small silver pendant in a shape I couldn't quite make out. Why are you asking about... She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes unfocused for a moment, like someone had hit a reset button in her brain. She blinked hard, confused. "I'm sorry, who were you asking about?" "Madison Chen, Trevor. I don't know anyone by those names." Her voice was flat now, mechanical. She picked up the phone without breaking eye contact with me. "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call." She turned away, but I heard her whisper into the phone, "We might have another one who remembers." My blood went cold. Another one? There were others? She hung up and turned back to me, that fake smile plastered on again. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Thompson, and please, be careful walking around town at night. Sometimes people get lost." The way she said "lost" made my skin crawl. I went to my room and locked the door, put a chair against it for good measure, then checked the windows. They were painted shut, which was actually reassuring. The room was a time capsule of ugly decor, but right now I didn't care about aesthetics. Another one who remembers? There were others? I sat on the bed, trying to make sense of everything. The laptop was still in my bag, and I pulled it out, connecting to the motel's barely functional Wi-Fi. Started searching for anything about memory alteration, mass amnesia, collective forgetting. Found articles about the Mandela effect, false memories, gaslighting on a massive scale. But nothing quite like this. Nothing about people being completely erased. Then I found something. A forum post from 2011, buried deep in an obscure paranormal website. The poster claimed their entire family had forgotten his sister existed, that he had photos of her, but everyone insisted they were photoshopped. The post had no replies, and when I clicked on the user's profile, it said, "User deleted." Another post from 2003. A woman in Montana saying 5 of her son's football teammates had disappeared from everyone's memory but hers. That post was also by a deleted user, 1995. A teacher claiming 2 of her colleagues had been erased from existence. Deleted user, 1996. An entire family supposedly vanished from memory in a small Colorado town, Cedar Ridge. The post mentioned Cedar Ridge by name. My hands shook as I kept searching. Found a pattern. Every few years, someone, somewhere, would post about people being forgotten. And always, the posts would disappear. The users would vanish, and no one would follow up. Except, I found a comment on one of the posts from username W. Crenshaw, 1952. "You're not crazy. Find the oldest person in town who works with the dead. They remember what shouldn't be remembered." W. Crenshaw. Walter Crenshaw. The groundskeeper I'd met that morning. That night, around 2 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. No knock. No sound. Just presence. I held my breath, watching the shadow under the door. It wasn't moving like a person standing still moves. You know, those tiny shifts of weight, little adjustments. This shadow was perfectly unnaturally still. Then I heard it. Breathing. But not normal breathing. It was synchronized. Multiple people breathing in perfect unison. In, out, like a single organism with many lungs. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop looking for them." Then another. "You're disturbing the peace." Another. "Some things are better forgotten." The shadow under the door shifted. Multiplied. There were many people standing outside my room now. All perfectly still. All breathing as one. I typed back, "Who are you?" The response came immediately. "We are Cedar Ridge, and Cedar Ridge protects itself." The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, all at once, the shadows moved away. Multiple footsteps, but all perfectly synchronized, like soldiers marching. They went down the hall, down the stairs, and out into the night. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat there, chair against the door, laptop on my knees, searching for more evidence that Madison, Trevor, and Sophie had existed. At dawn, I found it. A YouTube video from 2019. Cedar Ridge High Basketball Semifinals. Posted by someone's parent, shaky phone footage, and there, at the 3:47 mark, Trevor Williams making that winning shot. The commentator even says his name. Williams with the steal. Williams down court. Williams shoots. He scores. Trevor Williams wins it for Cedar Ridge. I downloaded the video immediately. Made 3 copies. Uploaded one to a cloud server. This was proof. Audio and video proof. But when I refreshed the page, the video was gone. This video has been removed by the user. I checked my downloads. The file was corrupted. The cloud upload had failed. It was like something was actively fighting against evidence of their existence. The next morning, I went to the last place I could think of, the old Cedar Ridge Cemetery. If they had existed and something had happened to them, maybe there would be graves, some physical evidence that couldn't be erased. The cemetery was at the edge of town, surrounded by pine forest. Morning fog clung to the headstones like spider silk. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. That perfect horror movie sound that would be cliché if it wasn't so genuinely unsettling. I walked through row after row, checking dates from 2019 to now. The fog was thick enough that I could only see about 10 feet in any direction. Headstones emerged from the mist like teeth. Some were old, weathered, dates barely legible. Others were new, polished granite with fresh flowers. I found the Johnsons, who'd died in a car accident in 2020. The Hendersons, COVID 2021. Mrs. Patterson, my old English teacher, cancer, 2022. All people I remembered. All people everyone remembered. But no Chen, no Williams, no Martinez. I checked everything. Every stone, every marker, even the columbarium where they kept cremated remains. Nothing. But then, in the oldest section of the cemetery, where the founders of Cedar Ridge were buried, I found something else. A memorial stone with no names. Just a date, October 15th, 2019. And below it, the words, "For those who are forgotten, but not gone." The stone was newer than those around it, but weathered in a strange way, like it had aged decades in just 5 years. The grass around it was dead in a perfect circle, but not brown dead, white dead, drained of all color. October 15th, 2019. 5 months after graduation. I tried to remember what had happened then, but my memories of that time were strangely fuzzy. I remembered starting college at CU Boulder, remembered coming home for Thanksgiving, but October was a blur, more than a blur. It was like trying to remember a dream within a dream. The harder I tried, the more it slipped away. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. An elderly man stood behind me, wearing a groundskeeper's uniform, but his eyes were sharp, alert. "You remember them, don't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. Madison, Trevor, and Sophie, yes. What happened to them? He looked around nervously. "Not here. Too exposed. Meet me at the old Miller Trail parking lot tonight. Midnight. Come alone." He started to walk away, then turned back. "And Alex? Don't trust anyone else. Not even people you think you know. The town made a choice. And those who remember are dangerous to that choice." The rest of the day, I felt eyes on me everywhere I went. The coffee shop, the gas station, even just walking down the street. People would look at me, then quickly away, whisper to each other. By evening, I was completely paranoid. At 11:45 p.m., I drove to Miller Trail. It was a hiking path that led up into the mountains, popular in summer but deserted in October. The parking lot was empty except for an old pickup truck. The groundskeeper was waiting, leaning against it. "My name's Walter," he said. "Walter Crenshaw. I've been the cemetery groundskeeper for 40 years, and I remember all of them, not just your 3. There have been others." Others? Every few years, someone disappears from memory, from records, from everything except a few minds that somehow resist whatever does this. In 1987, it was the entire Donovan family, parents and 3 kids, just gone from everyone's memory. I only remember because I dug their graves. Hard to forget burying 5 empty coffins. In 1995, 2 teachers, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Rodriguez. They'd been investigating something in the town archives. In 2003, 5 members of the football team. They'd gone camping up near the old mine and came back different. Started asking questions. Started remembering things they shouldn't. In 2011, the girl who worked at the diner, Emma, and her boyfriend, Chris. They were planning to leave town, to tell someone about what they'd discovered. And in 2019, Madison, Trevor, and Sophie. He nodded. They found something they weren't supposed to find, asked questions they weren't supposed to ask, just like you're doing now. What did they find? Walter looked up at the mountains. The peaks were shrouded in clouds, but there was something unnatural about the way they moved, like the clouds were breathing. You know the old stories about Cedar Ridge? How it was founded in 1889 by settlers who got lost in a blizzard. How they survived when they should have frozen to death. Everyone knows that story. It's on the town welcome sign. What they don't tell you is what they had to agree to for that survival. What they had to feed. My blood went cold. Feed? Not with food. With forgetting. With erasure. The town made a bargain with something old that lives in these mountains. Something that feeds on existence itself. Not death, complete non-existence. Being erased from reality, from memory, from ever having been. That's insane. Is it? You've seen the evidence. Your 3 friends found out about the bargain. They were going to expose it, leave town, tell the world. They'd taken photos of the old documents in the town hall basement. The original charter, the real one. The one written in English and something else. So the town council made a choice. Better 3 than all of us. The town council, they chose who gets erased? October 15th every few years, when it gets hungry, they choose people who won't be missed. Outsiders, troublemakers, or people who learn the truth. Like me, he nodded gravely. You need to leave. Tonight, right now. Don't go back to the motel. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just drive, and don't stop until you're 3 states away. And whatever you do, never come back. But Madison, Trevor, Sophie, they're still out there somehow? You said forgotten, but not gone. Walter's face went pale. That's the worst part. They're not dead. They're nowhere. Existing in nothing. Conscious, but erased. And sometimes on quiet nights, you can hear them trying to scream their names back into existence. As if on cue, the wind picked up. And I swear I heard it. Whispers in the wind. Remember us, please. But it was more than whispers. It was like the sound was coming from inside my skull, from the empty spaces between thoughts. Madison? I called out to the darkness. Trevor? Sophie? The wind grew stronger, and with it came a smell. Ozone and copper and something else. Something like the scent of forgetting, if forgetting had a scent. Like old photographs burning. Walter grabbed my arm. Don't call to them. It makes it worse. Makes them hope. And hope in that place. Hope is the cruelest thing of all. I should have run. Should have gotten in my car and never looked back. But I couldn't. Not knowing Madison, Trevor, and Sophie were somehow still out there, trapped in nothingness. I thought about Madison's parents. They lived on Maple Street. Did they even remember they had a daughter? Or was there just an empty room in their house that they walked past every day, never wondering why they had a 3rd bedroom? Did they sometimes pause at the grocery store, reaching for almond milk before remembering no one in their family drank it, not knowing it had been Madison's favorite? And Trevor's little sister, Keisha. She'd idolized him, went to every game. Did she remember cheering for her brother? Or did she just have vague memories of being at basketball games for no reason? Sophie's grandmother, who'd raised her after her parents died. Did she sit alone now, not even having memories of her granddaughter to keep her company? How do we stop it? I asked Walter. You can't stop it. It's been here longer than the town. Longer than people, probably. But there has to be something. Walter studied me for a long moment. There might be one way, but it's dangerous, and it might not work. Tell me. The old mining tunnels in the mountains. That's where it lives. Where the original bargain was made. Every October 15th, that's where the town council goes to. Complete the transaction. If someone were to interfere, to break the bargain, everyone would remember? Maybe. Or maybe it would just take everyone. The whole town. There's no way to know. When's the next October 15th? Walter checked his watch. About 6 hours. It's already October 15th. My heart skipped. Tonight? They're doing it tonight? Not they. We. The whole town participates, whether they know it or not. At 3 a.m., everyone in Cedar Ridge unconsciously gives up their memories of the chosen ones. It's part of the bargain, but you're resistant somehow, just like I am. We remember when we shouldn't. Then we can stop it. Alex, no, you don't understand. The council will be there, and they won't let anyone interfere. They'll kill you before they let you break the bargain. But I was already walking back to my car. Then I'll have to be careful. Alex, this is suicide. I turned back to him. Madison wanted to be an astronaut. Trevor was going to be a social worker, help kids from rough backgrounds like his. Sophie wanted to write novels. They had dreams, Walter, lives. They existed. And I'm the only one who remembers that. If I don't try, who will? Walter stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. The old Buckhorn mine entrance. 2 miles up the trail, then east through the woods. Follow the creek. You'll know it when you see it. But Alex, once you go in those tunnels, you might not come out. And even if you do, you might wish you hadn't. I got in my car and drove back toward town, but parked off the road near Miller Trail. I had 3 hours to prepare. 3 hours to figure out how to break a bargain that had stood for over a century. The hike up the trail was eerily quiet. No animals, no insects. Even the wind had died. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. My flashlight beam seemed weak against the darkness, swallowed up by the trees after just a few feet. The trail was well maintained for the first mile. Gravel path, occasional benches, signs marking different tree species. But after that, it deteriorated, became a deer path, then barely a suggestion of a trail. By the time I reached the 2-mile marker, a wooden post so weathered the 2 was barely visible. I was pushing through undergrowth, branches catching at my clothes. I turned east, following the sound of running water. The creek was narrow, but fast-moving, ice-cold when I accidentally stepped in it. I followed it upstream, climbing over fallen logs, pushing through brambles that tore at my jeans. The forest here was different, older. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than my car, and they were wrong, somehow, growing in patterns that hurt to look at. Spirals that seemed to twist inward on themselves. Branches that formed shapes that couldn't quite exist in 3 dimensions. The creek led me through increasingly dense forest until I saw it. An old wooden structure partially collapsed against the mountainside. The entrance to Buckhorn Mine. But that wasn't what made me stop dead in my tracks. There were lights inside, flickering, like torches or lanterns, and voices, chanting in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood in my bones. Each word was like ice in my veins, like remembering something terrible from a dream. The rhythm was wrong, not made for human throats. It rose and fell in patterns that made my teeth ache. The ceremony had already begun. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. The old mine entrance had been reinforced recently. New wooden beams holding up the old ones. Someone had been maintaining this place. Through gaps in the old wooden boards, I could see them. The entire town council, Mayor Davidson, Sheriff Brooks, even Mrs. Hendricks from the library, but also others. Dr. Romano from the hospital. Principal Hayes. The owner of the grocery store, Mr. Chen. No relation to Madison, just cruel irony. At least 20 people, all wearing dark robes over their regular clothes, standing in a circle, facing something I couldn't quite see in the center. The mine shaft extended deep into the mountain, lit by torches every few feet. The walls were covered in something, symbols or writing that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air coming from the mine was wrong, too warm, too thick, carrying that same scent of copper and ozone and forgetting. And then I heard it. New voices. Familiar voices. Screaming. Please, someone remember us. We existed. We were real. Madison, Trevor, Sophie. Their voices were coming from the center of the circle, but I couldn't see them. It was like they were there and not there simultaneously, like watching a TV with bad reception, catching glimpses between static. We had lives. We had dreams. I was going to MIT. Madison's voice, desperate, raw from screaming. My sister, Kesha, she needs me. Please. Trevor, sobbing. My grandmother. She's alone. She doesn't even know she's alone. Sophie, her voice breaking. Mayor Davidson raised his hands. His voice boomed through the cave, unnaturally loud. We offer these forgotten ones to maintain our bargain. As it has been since 1889, so it shall continue. The town of Cedar Ridge survives through sacrifice, through selective forgetting, through feeding that which guards us. Guards you from what? I wanted to shout, but kept silent, watching. The chanting grew louder. The circle began to move, rotating slowly clockwise. And in the center, I finally saw it, or tried to see it. My brain couldn't quite process what I was looking at. No! I burst through the entrance before I could stop myself. 20 heads turned to me in perfect unison. Stop this! Sheriff Brooks reached for his gun, but Mayor Davidson raised a hand to stop him. The mayor's eyes were sad but determined. Alex Thompson, we expected you might come. The ones who remember always do, eventually. You can't just erase people. They existed. They had lives. And the 400 people in this town have lives too. Families, children. Would you condemn them all for 3? You don't know that would happen, don't we? The mayor stepped aside, and I finally saw what was in the center of the circle clearly. It wasn't something you could really look at directly. It was like a hole in reality itself, a wrongness that hurt to perceive. Like looking at a color that didn't exist, a shape with too many dimensions folding in on itself, and around it I could see them. Translucent, flickering like bad reception, Madison, Trevor, and Sophie. They were aged, not physically, but something in their eyes. 5 years of existing in nothing had left marks that went deeper than flesh. They saw me. Their eyes went wide with hope. Alex! Madison screamed. You remember. You can see us. The bargain is simple, Mayor Davidson continued, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. It feeds on existence, on being forgotten. In exchange, our town thrives. Our children grow up safe. Our community endures. No tornadoes, though we're in Tornado Alley. No floods, though we're in a floodplain. No fires, though we're surrounded by dry forest. No tragedies that take our young. All it asks is that we occasionally feed it those who would destroy us all by revealing the truth. Or maybe it won't, I said, stepping forward. Maybe you've been feeding it for nothing. Maybe you've been murdering people for over a century based on fear. The thing in the center shifted, expanded, and suddenly I could hear it in my head. Not words, but meaning. Hunger. Ancient, endless hunger. And memories that weren't mine. I saw Cedar Ridge in 1889. 23 settlers, lost in the worst blizzard in recorded history. Children freezing. No food, no hope. They should have died, would have died, until one of them, a woman named Margaret Davidson, the mayor's great-great-grandmother, found the cave, found the thing, and made the bargain. I saw the first feeding. A traveling salesman in 1891 who asked too many questions about the town's prosperity. Erased, his horse and wagon found abandoned on the trail, but no one remembered a rider. I saw decades of feedings, people who threatened the secret, people who tried to leave with the knowledge, people who just knew too much, and I saw what would happen if the bargain broke. The thing showed me Cedar Ridge consumed, not destroyed, erased. Every person, every building, every memory of the town's existence wiped from reality, as if those 400 people had never been born. Their children never born. Every good thing they'd ever done, undone. Take their place, the thing offered. Let them return and be forgotten yourself. Or join the bargain. Forget them and live. Or break the bargain and watch 400 disappear. I looked at Madison, Trevor, and Sophie. Saw the terror in their eyes. The plea. They'd been trapped in nothing for 5 years. 5 years of existing without existing. Of screaming without being heard. Of watching the world continue without them. Unable to touch it, to change it, to be part of it. There's a third option, I said. And before anyone could stop me, I pulled out the photo I'd taken at the library. The one that showed all 3 of them. Evidence, proof they existed. The thing recoiled. The mayor screamed, "No!" Sheriff Brooks drew his gun. But I was already moving, diving toward the center of the circle. Toward that impossible void, holding the photo high. They existed. Madison Chen, Trevor Williams, Sophie Martinez. They were real. They are real. And I remember. The photo touched the void. The sound it made, I can't describe it. Like reality tearing. Like existence itself screaming. The void began to fluctuate, pulsing like a dying heart. The town council members fell to their knees, clutching their heads, blood running from their noses. "You don't understand," Mayor Davidson gasped. "The photo isn't enough. Memory isn't enough. It needs... What? What does it need?" "A name." Madison's voice clearer now, more solid. "It needs its name. The thing that feeds, if you name it, you bind it." But how could I name something that predated names, something that existed before language? Then I remembered Walter's words, the original charter, written in English and something else. "The charter!" I shouted to the mayor. "Where's the original charter?" His eyes widened in horror. "You can't. Where is it?" Mrs. Hendricks, blood streaming from her eyes now, pointed deeper into the mine. "The altar, at the first chamber." I ran. Behind me the void was expanding, contracting, reality bending around it. The screams of Madison, Trevor, and Sophie mixed with something else. The sound of existence itself under threat. The first chamber was 50 feet into the mine. The walls here were carved with those symbols that hurt to look at. And there, on a natural shelf of rock, was an ancient wooden box. Inside was the charter. Yellowed, brittle, but intact. Half in English, half in something else. But as I looked at those alien symbols, I found I could read them. The thing in the void, in its pain, was broadcasting its nature. And suddenly I understood. Its name wasn't a word, it was a concept, a primordial truth. "Vorthak Nihil!" I screamed. "The hunger between, the eater of was, Vorthak Nihil, I name you." The mine shook. Dust and rocks fell from the ceiling, and the thing shrieked. A sound that wasn't just heard, but felt in every atom. I ran back to the main chamber. The void was collapsing but not disappearing, transforming, and Madison, Trevor, and Sophie, they solidified, became real again. Fully, completely real. "Run!" I grabbed Madison's hand, who grabbed Trevor's, who grabbed Sophie's. We ran as the mine began to shake, as the mountain itself seemed to roar in anger. Behind us, that thing, Vorthak Nihil, imploded. It didn't disappear. It collapsed into something else. Something smaller. Contained. Still hungry, but no longer able to feed. Bound by its name, trapped by recognition. Sophie didn't write novels. How could she create fictional worlds when she'd been trapped outside of reality itself? She worked at the library, taking Mrs. Hendricks' place, surrounded by proof that things existed. that stories were real, that words had weight. They stayed in Cedar Ridge, unable to leave, bound somehow to the place that had erased them. And late at night, when the town is quiet, you can still sometimes hear it. That hunger, that ancient need to feed on forgetting. Vorthak Nihil, trapped but not dead, calling out from beneath tons of rock. The bargain was broken, but the thing that made it isn't gone. Not really. It's just waiting. Waiting for its name to be forgotten again. Waiting for the seal to weaken. Waiting to feed. And sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. If saving 3 people was worth risking 400. If bringing back everyone who'd been forgotten was worth the madness it caused. Because the town changed after that night. People remembered too much. Remembered things that contradicted each other. Remembered people who couldn't have existed at the same time. Mrs. Patterson remembered teaching a student named David Chen in 1987, but also remembered David Chen dying in 1983. Tom Morrison remembered his brother who'd played football in 2003, but also remembered being an only child. The human mind wasn't meant to hold parallel memories, contradicting truths. Suicides increased. People left town in droves, unable to handle the cognitive dissonance. Cedar Ridge's population dropped from 400 to 200 in 6 months. The economic protection the bargain had provided vanished. The paper mill closed. The ski resort went bankrupt. Main Street became a row of empty shops. But Madison, Trevor, and Sophie couldn't leave. And neither could I. We were bound to this place now, guardians of a broken bargain, watchers of a trapped god. But then I remember Madison's laugh, Trevor's jokes, Sophie's stories. They existed. They were real. They deserved to be remembered. And now, everyone remembers. Even if they don't understand what they're remembering. The town council never speaks of that night. The mine was sealed with concrete. And officially, Madison, Trevor, and Sophie were victims of a kidnapping, found wandering in the woods with trauma-induced amnesia. But I know the truth. Walter knows. And now you know too. So let me ask you again. Check your yearbooks. Look for faces that seem familiar but have no names. Spaces where someone should be but isn't. Because Cedar Ridge isn't the only town with old bargains. With things that feed on forgetting. And sometimes being the only one who remembers isn't a gift. It's a warning. If you're still listening, if this story kept you awake, then remember their names. Madison Chen, Trevor Williams, Sophie Martinez. Say them out loud, right now, because every time someone speaks their names, they become a little more real, a little more protected from sliding back into nothing. And if you have your own stories of people who disappeared, not just physically, but from memory itself, share them. Comment below. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough of us remember, they can never be forgotten again. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. Story number 3. The emergency dispatch board lit up like a Christmas tree at 3:47 a.m. But there was something different about call number 4291 that made my coffee grow cold in my hands. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the darkness that lurks in ordinary American homes. What I heard that night should have been impossible. Yet, the recording exists. The caller's voice still echoes in my dreams. And the worst part? The address she gave us. It doesn't exist. It never did. The story starts now. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been working the night shift at the Riverside County 911 Dispatch Center for 8 years. 8 long years of hearing humanity at its worst moments. Domestic violence calls from trailer parks in Moreno Valley. Overdoses in the desert towns outside Palm Springs. Car accidents on the I-2 and 15 where families get torn apart in seconds. You develop thick skin in this job. You have to. But thick skin doesn't prepare you for the impossible. It was a Tuesday night in October, the kind where the Santa Ana winds make everyone in Southern California feel like their nerves are made of live wire. The calls had been steady but routine. A break-in at a Walmart in Hemet, a minor fender bender near the casino, an elderly man in Temecula who couldn't find his medication. Then the board flashed red. Line 7. I slipped on my headset and hit the button. 911, what's your emergency? Silence. Not dead air, but the kind of silence that has weight to it, like someone holding their breath. Hello, 911, can you hear me? A woman's voice barely above a whisper. They're in the walls. My training kicked in immediately. Possible psychiatric emergency or drug-related call. I'd handled hundreds. Ma'am, I need you to speak up. What's your location? 1247 Sycamore Drive, Riverside. Her voice was trembling, but clear. Educated, mid-30s, I guessed. Please, they've been scratching all night. They're inside the walls now. I typed the address into the system while keeping her talking. Standard protocol. Okay, ma'am, I'm sending someone to check on you. Can you tell me your name? Jessica Chen. A pause, then quieter. They know I can hear them. The address search came back blank. I frowned and typed it again. Still nothing. Ma'am, I'm having trouble locating 1247 Sycamore Drive. Are you sure about the address? I've lived here for 3 years. Her voice carried that particular strain of someone trying very hard to stay calm. It's between Oak Street and Maple, you know, where the old Henderson place used to be before they tore it down. I pulled up the mapping system. Sycamore Drive did exist, running east-west through one of Riverside's older neighborhoods. But according to our database, the addresses jumped from 1245 to 1249. No, 1247. Jessica, I'm looking at the street map and I'm not seeing that specific address. Is it possible you're thinking of a different street? Maybe Sycamore Avenue? A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Smaller, more afraid. No, I know where I live. Oh God, they're getting louder. That's when I heard it. In the background of the call. A sound like fingernails dragging across drywall. Slow, deliberate, coming from multiple directions. I've taken calls from people having psychotic breaks before. The homeless man who insisted CIA agents were beaming thoughts into his head through the streetlights. The meth addict who swore shadow people were crawling through her apartment vents. But Jessica's voice, it didn't have that disconnected quality. She sounded terrified but rational. And that scratching sound, it was too clear, too real. Jessica, I want you to stay on the line with me. I'm dispatching officers to your area right now. I was already typing notes for the responding units. Can you describe what you're hearing? It started around midnight, like mice at first. You know how they sound in the attic? But mice don't scratch in patterns. Her breathing was getting faster. They're making designs, lines, shapes, and they're everywhere now. The kitchen walls, the bedroom, even the bathroom. The scratching sound intensified through the phone. Not random noise, deliberate, rhythmic, like Morse code written in desperation. Ma'am, are you alone in the house? Yes, my husband David is on a business trip to Phoenix. He won't be back until Thursday. A crash in the background, like something falling. Oh no, no. Jessica, what just happened? The picture fell. The wedding photo above our couch. It just fell off the wall. Her voice was shaking now. But the nail is still there. The nail is still there and it's not bent and the wire isn't broken. I was typing frantically, trying to get units to the general area. Sycamore Drive between Oak and Maple. Even if the address was wrong, we could canvass the neighborhood. I'm showing 2 patrol units 3 minutes away from your location. Stay with me. The scratching stopped. The line went dead quiet. Not even ambient household sounds. no refrigerator hum, no clock ticking, nothing. "Jessica?" It stopped. Her whisper was so faint, I had to turn up the volume. They all stopped at the same time. That's when I heard the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then 3 more coming through the phone line. "Someone's at the door," Jessica whispered. "Don't answer it. The police are almost there. But they're knocking from inside." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean, inside?" "The knocking. It's coming from the basement door, but I don't have a basement." My supervisor, Lieutenant Torres, appeared at my workstation. He'd been monitoring the call from his office. In 15 years of dispatching, I'd never seen him look concerned. Tonight, his face was pale. "The units are on Sycamore Drive," he whispered, not wanting to interfere with the call. "There's no 1247. Houses go 1245, then 1249. Empty lot in between." I looked at him, then back at my screen. Jessica was still on the line. I could hear her moving around, the floor creaking under her feet. "Ma'am, I need you to go to your front window and look outside. Can you see the street number on your house?" Okay. Footsteps, the sound of curtains being pulled back. "It says 1247. It's right there on the mailbox and what is it, Jessica?" "There are no police cars. You said they'd be here in 3 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. Her voice was getting higher, more panicked. "Where are they? Where are the police?" I looked at Torres. He shook his head grimly. "Both units are parked on Sycamore. They're looking at an empty lot with a for sale sign. Has been empty for 2 years. The knocking started again, this time from multiple locations. The basement door, the kitchen wall, somewhere upstairs. "They're in the walls," Jessica whispered. "They're all around me now. Moving. I can hear them moving. Ma'am, I want you to go outside, right now. Go to your front yard and wait for the officers." I can't." "Why can't you go outside?" A long pause. When Jessica spoke again, her voice carried a terrible understanding. "Because I looked out the window. Really looked, and there's nothing there. No street, no other houses, no sky, just black. Everything outside is just black." My hands were shaking as I typed. Torres was on his radio calling for additional units, for a supervisor, for someone who might understand what we were dealing with. "Jessica, listen to my voice. You're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out." "No." Her voice was eerily calm now. "No, I don't think I am, because I just realized something. Something I should have noticed before." "What's that?" "I don't remember calling you. I don't remember picking up the phone. I don't remember dialing 911. A pause. "But I've been talking to you for 20 minutes. The line crackled with static. Through the interference, I could hear the scratching again, but now it was different. Organized, like writing. "They're spelling something," Jessica whispered. "On the wall behind me. They're scratching out words." "What does it say?" "It says, 'She's been dead for 3 years.'" The phone line went dead. Torres immediately started making calls. We pulled the reverse directory, checked property records, ran Jessica Chen's name through every database we had access to. What we found made my blood run cold. Jessica Chen, 34, had lived at 1247 Sycamore Drive. The address did exist 3 years ago, until October 15th, when a gas leak explosion leveled the house. Jessica had been inside at the time. Her husband David was on a business trip to Phoenix. The lot had been empty ever since. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. We have the recording. 43 minutes of conversation with a woman who died 3 years before I ever answered her call. The audio is crystal clear. Her voice, the background sounds, even that terrible scratching. It's all there. I've listened to it hundreds of times. I've had audio experts analyze it. no one can explain how it's possible. The call came through our standard emergency lines. It showed up in our system like any other 911 call, but the woman on the other end, she couldn't have made it. The case was quietly closed. Official explanation: equipment malfunction. But I know what I heard, and sometimes, late at night when the dispatch center is quiet, I find myself staring at the phone lines, waiting for it to ring again. Because there's one more detail I haven't told anyone. Something I discovered when I was going through the property records. Jessica Chen wasn't the first person to die at 1247 Sycamore Drive. The house had a history. 3 other unexplained deaths over 40 years. All of them women. All of them alone when it happened. And all of them called 911 in their final moments, describing the same thing: scratching in the walls. The recordings of those calls were lost in a fire at the old dispatch center in 1987, all except for one line that survived in a supervisor's notes. A woman named Margaret Holt, found dead in 1979. They're writing something on the wall behind me. Last week, I got a call from a real estate agent. Someone wants to build a new house on the empty lot at 1247 Sycamore Drive. Construction starts next month. I tried to warn them. I called the developer, the city planning office, even the fire department. But what can you say? That a dead woman told you the land is haunted? That the walls themselves are hungry? I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was professional curiosity, or maybe something deeper. But I started digging into the history of that address during my off hours. What I found painted a picture darker than I ever imagined. The original house was built in 1952 by a man named Robert Hendricks. Nice family home, white picket fence, the American dream. But the dream turned into a nightmare within the first year. Mrs. Hendricks, Eleanor, she started complaining about sounds in the walls. Her neighbors thought she was having a nervous breakdown. This was the 1950s. Women's mental health wasn't exactly a priority. The police reports from that era are sparse, but I managed to track down some old newspaper clippings at the Riverside Public Library. The headline from October 1953 read, "Local housewife found dead in mysterious circumstances. Eleanor Hendricks was discovered in her living room, sitting in her favorite chair, staring at the wall behind the couch. No signs of violence, no obvious cause of death. The coroner ruled it heart failure, brought on by extreme stress. But here's the detail that made my skin crawl. When they found her, there were scratch marks all over the walls, deep gouges in the plaster, and carved into the wall directly behind where she died, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. The word help repeated over and over in crude, desperate letters. Robert Hendricks moved out immediately. Sold the house to the bank for almost nothing. He told anyone who would listen that his wife had been trying to warn him about something. He died in a veterans hospital in 1987, still talking about voices in the walls. The house sold again in 1963 to the Morrison family. Young couple with a 2-year-old daughter. They lasted 6 months. Mrs. Morrison, Janet, started hearing the scratching sounds within weeks of moving in. Her husband thought it was mice, then termites, then settling foundation. But Janet knew better. She called the police 17 times in those 6 months. I found the reports filed under domestic disturbance and welfare check. Each report described the same thing: scratching sounds, voices in the walls, and Mrs. Morrison's growing insistence that something was trapped inside the house. The final report, dated March 15, 1964, was different. Officer Patricia Williams, one of the first female officers in Riverside, noted that she actually heard the scratching during her welfare check. She described it as systematic and purposeful, as if something was trying to communicate. 2 days later, Janet Morrison was found dead in her kitchen. Same cause of death as Eleanor Hendricks, heart failure from extreme stress. Her 2-year-old daughter was found 3 days later in her crib, dehydrated but alive. The child kept pointing at the walls and saying, "Mama trapped, Mama in wall." The Morrison house sat empty for 5 years before the bank finally found another buyer. Margaret Holt, a divorced secretary in her 30s, thought she was getting the deal of a lifetime. The price was suspiciously low, but the real estate agent explained it away. Previous owners had moved out of state. Bank was motivated to sell. Margaret lasted longer than the others, almost 2 full years, but the pattern was the same. Scratching sounds that started soft and grew more insistent. Calls to the police that were dismissed as the neuroses of a lonely woman. And then, in November 1979, the final call. I managed to track down the responding officer from that night. Detective Ray Gonzalez, now retired and living in a small apartment near the downtown Mission. He agreed to meet me at a Denny's on University Avenue. What he told me over coffee and pie changed everything I thought I knew about that cursed address. "I was a rookie then," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. "Thought I'd seen everything. But that call was different. Dispatch said welfare check, possible psychiatric emergency. Standard stuff, but when I got to 1247 Sycamore..." He paused, staring out the window at the late afternoon traffic. The front door was open, not wide open, just ajar, like someone had stepped outside for a moment and forgot to close it. I called out, identified myself, no answer, so I went inside. Detective Gonzalez described walking through a house that felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. The furniture was perfectly arranged, no signs of struggle or disturbance. But the walls, every single wall had scratch marks. Not random gouges, patterns, like writing, but not in any language I recognized. The marks were deep, too, deeper than fingernails could make. You'd need tools for that kind of damage. He found Margaret Holt in the basement, a basement that, according to city records, didn't exist when the house was originally built. She was sitting at the bottom of wooden stairs that looked decades old, facing the foundation wall. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't breathing. The coroner said heart attack, just like the others, but there was something else. Something that never made it into the official report. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. When I moved her body, there was something carved into the wall behind her. Fresh cuts. Still bleeding wood shavings. It said, "We are the walls." Detective Gonzalez retired early in 1985. He'd seen enough death and violence in his 20 years on the force, but nothing had affected him like that night at 1247 Sycamore Drive. "I drove by that house every patrol for the next 6 years," he told me. "Even after it sold again. Especially after it sold again. Because I knew whatever killed those women was still there." The house sold one more time before Jessica and David Chen bought it in 2018. A family named the Washingtons owned it from 1981 to 2017. 36 years. Longest anyone had ever lived there. But the Washingtons weren't immune to the curse. They just adapted to it. I found Mrs. Washington in a senior care facility in Beaumont. 84 years old, sharp as a tack, and surprisingly willing to talk about her decades on Sycamore Drive. Her children thought she was developing dementia when she started talking about voices in the walls. But Mrs. Washington knew better. "The scratching started in our 2nd month there," she told me, her gnarled hands folding and unfolding in her lap. "Just like the others, I'm sure. But I didn't call the police. I'd heard the stories. I knew what happened to women who complained about that house." Instead, Mrs. Washington did something remarkable. She started talking back. I figured if something was trapped in those walls, maybe it was lonely, maybe it just needed someone to listen. She smiled, a sad but knowing expression. So every night, when the scratching started, I'd sit in my kitchen and talk about my day, about my children, about anything that came to mind. For 36 years, Mrs. Washington carried on nightly conversations with whatever lived in the walls of 1247 Sycamore Drive. Her husband thought she was losing her mind, but he never tried to stop her. The scratching never escalated. The voices never turned threatening. As long as she acknowledged them, they remained peaceful. It was a woman, Mrs. Washington said. I could tell from the patterns, the way the scratching moved. She was trying to tell me something, but I never could figure out what. Not until the very end. In 2017, Mrs. Washington's arthritis had gotten so bad she couldn't live alone anymore. Her children insisted she move to assisted living. On her last night in the house, the scratching was different, more urgent, more desperate. She knew I was leaving, Mrs. Washington whispered. And she was scared. The scratching spelled out words that night, clear as day. Don't let them forget us. The house sold to the Chens 3 months later. Mrs. Washington tried to warn Jessica, but who believes stories about haunted walls, especially from an elderly woman who talks to empty rooms? Jessica was so excited about that house, Mrs. Washington recalled, said it had such good bones, such solid walls. Her laugh was bitter. If she only knew. Armed with this new information, I started reviewing our dispatch logs from the past 3 years, looking for any other calls from 1247 Sycamore Drive. What I found made me question everything I thought I knew about that October night. There had been other calls, 7 of them to be exact, all between Jessica's move-in date and the night she died, all dismissed as pranks or equipment malfunctions because they came from an address that our system couldn't verify. The first call came just 2 weeks after the Chens moved in. A man's voice this time, David Chen, reporting strange sounds in the walls. The call lasted 3 minutes before the line went dead. The responding units found no one at the address. The second call, a month later. Jessica, sounding calm but concerned, asking about the previous owners of her house. She wanted to know if there had been any problems with the property. Any incidents. The dispatcher treated it like an information request and transferred her to the city clerk's office. No follow-up. The calls escalated from there, each one more desperate than the last. Jessica reporting prowlers that left no footprints. David calling about electrical problems that made no sense. Both of them, separately, describing voices that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. The 7th call came the night before Jessica died. David, calling from Phoenix, panic in his voice. He'd been trying to reach his wife for 2 days. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She wasn't answering emails or texts. He'd asked a neighbor to check on her, but no one could see any lights in the house. Please, his voice cracked through the recording. Just send someone to check on her. I know something's wrong. I can feel it. The dispatcher logged it as a welfare check request, but when units arrived at the address, they found only an empty lot. No house. No Jessica Chen. According to their records, no one had lived at that address for over 2 years. David Chen filed a missing person report the next morning. The case was transferred to detectives, but without a valid address or any evidence of foul play, the investigation stalled. David hired private investigators, offered rewards, even brought in psychics and paranormal experts. Nothing. The official story became that Jessica had left voluntarily. Maybe she was having an affair. Maybe she was running from debts or legal trouble. These things happened all the time. David didn't believe it, but without proof, he never stopped looking. Even now, 3 years later, David Chen pays for missing person ads in newspapers across California. His wife's picture stares back from bus stops and grocery store bulletin boards. Have you seen Jessica? Last seen at 1247 Sycamore Drive, Riverside. But here's what David doesn't know. What no one knows except me. I've been monitoring the emergency calls from that empty lot, and they haven't stopped. Every few months, usually in the early morning hours, our system logs a call from 1247 Sycamore Drive. Different operators take them. The night shift rotates, and not everyone has been working here as long as I have. They follow protocol, dispatch units to check out reports of domestic disturbances or welfare checks or prowlers. The units report back the same thing every time. Empty lot, no structures, no signs of activity. Most of my colleagues dismiss these as system glitches. Ghost signals from old landlines that were never properly disconnected. It happens sometimes in older neighborhoods where the infrastructure gets updated, but the databases don't sync properly. But I listen to the recordings. I keep copies on a personal drive that I back up religiously. And what I hear in those calls, it's not a system glitch, it's Jessica. And she's not alone anymore. The voices have changed over the past 3 years. What started as one terrified woman has become more. A chorus of whispers that blend together like wind through broken boards. I can pick out individual voices sometimes. Eleanor Hendricks's mid-Atlantic accent from the 1950s. Janet Morrison's younger, breathier tone. Margaret Holt's clipped professional delivery. And now, Jessica's voice, adding to the collection. They're all trapped in whatever space exists between the walls that were and the walls that might be again. And they're trying to warn us about something worse than death. Something that feeds on the fear and desperation of women who find themselves alone in houses that refuse to stay gone. The construction company broke ground on the new house last Monday. I've been driving by the site every day after my shift, watching the workers lay foundation and frame the walls. They work fast. Modern construction methods, prefab materials, everything designed for efficiency and profit. But I've noticed things, small things that the construction crew hasn't picked up on. The way their tools go missing and turn up in different locations. The radio that keeps changing stations by itself, always landing on AM frequencies that broadcast nothing but static. The way the workers' conversations die when they get too close to the center of the lot, as if sound itself gets swallowed by the earth there. 2 workers have quit already. Both claimed they heard voices coming from inside the foundation walls. Impossible, since the walls are solid concrete. But I believe them, because I know that some sounds don't need physical structures to carry them. They echo through time itself. The new house is almost finished. A beautiful 2-story colonial with white trim and a wraparound porch. The kind of house that appears in real estate dreams and mortgage commercials. The kind of house that young couples drive past on Sunday afternoons and point to, saying, "Someday, honey, someday we'll have a house just like that." But I've seen the blueprints, filed with the city planning office, available to anyone who knows how to look. The new house at 1247 Sycamore Drive has been designed with one feature that none of the previous houses had. A basement. A finished basement with drywall and carpet and recessed lighting. The perfect place for a family room or home office. The perfect place for sounds to echo and multiply and grow into something that no longer needs a source. The construction foreman, a guy named Mike Petrosky, agreed to meet me at the job site last Thursday. I told him I was a local historian interested in the property's background. He was happy to show off his work. New houses don't go up in these old neighborhoods very often. "Beautiful lot," he said, walking me through the framed structure. Weird that it sat empty for so long. Great location, mature trees, quiet street. You'd think someone would have snapped it up years ago. We were standing in what would be the living room when I asked about any unusual incidents during construction. His expression changed immediately. "You hear things on job sites," he said carefully, "especially when you're working with old foundations and utility lines. Sound carries funny underground." But then he admitted that 3 different workers had reported hearing what sounded like voices coming from inside the basement walls. Always women's voices. Always just loud enough to notice, but too quiet to understand. We brought in an engineer to check for hollow spaces, Mike continued. Sometimes older foundations have gaps where the concrete didn't pour right. But these walls are solid. 6 inches of reinforced concrete over a vapor barrier, nothing inside but concrete and rebar. He showed me the basement space, still rough and unfinished. The walls were indeed solid. I knocked on them myself, listening for hollow spots. But as we stood there in the dim afternoon light filtering through the ground-level windows, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. Scratching, soft, rhythmic, purposeful scratching coming from inside the east wall. The wall that, according to the original lot survey, would be exactly where Eleanor Hendricks died in 1953. Mike heard it too. His face went pale, and he quickly ushered me back upstairs. "Probably just the concrete settling," he said. But his voice carried the same strain I'd heard in Jessica Chen's final call. The sound of someone trying very hard to convince themselves that impossible things have rational explanations. The house is scheduled for final inspection next week. After that, it goes on the market. Mike estimates it will sell within a month. Desirable neighborhood, move-in ready, competitively priced. Some young couple will drive past and fall in love with the wraparound porch and mature landscaping. They'll make an offer, get approved for a mortgage, hire movers, and start a new chapter of their lives at 1247 Sycamore Drive. And sometime in their first month, probably around 3:47 a.m., they'll hear scratching in the walls. I've been debating whether to try to stop it. Anonymous letters to the developer, fake environmental concerns, anything to delay the sale. But who would believe me? And even if they did, would it matter? The house has been destroyed before, and that didn't stop the calls. Whatever lives in the walls of 1247 Sycamore Drive doesn't need physical walls to survive. It needs something else. Something that I'm only beginning to understand. It needs witnesses. People who will hear their voices and remember their names. People who will answer when they call for help, even if that help never comes. And maybe that's enough. Maybe bearing witness is its own kind of salvation. The dispatching board lights up again. Line 7, 3:47 a.m. I know what I'll hear when I answer. The same desperate chorus, now 5 voices strong, spelling out warnings in scratches and whispers, telling me about the new family that's moving in next week, asking me to remember their names when the walls claim another voice. I put on my headset and prepare to listen, because that's what I do. I answer when people call for help, even when help is impossible. Even when the caller has been dead for years. Even when I know that someday my voice will join their chorus. The red light blinks. I take a breath and press the button. 911, what's your emergency? What do you think Jessica was really trying to tell us? Was she warning us about something worse than death? And why do you think the calls always come at 3:47 a.m.? Share your theories below, but be careful what you say. The walls have been listening for 40 years, and some sounds echo longer than others. If you've experienced anything similar, if you've worked in emergency services and heard calls that shouldn't exist, drop a comment. Let's figure this out together, before the next name gets carved into the dark. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that blur the line between the living and the lost. Because in a world where the impossible becomes inevitable, the only thing scarier than the unknown is discovering you're not alone in it.